Welcome, dear listener, to another evening of intrigue and intellect. Pull up a chair by the fire, pour yourself a glass of something smooth, perhaps a beer if you're like me, and settle in for a tale from the brownstone on West 35th Street. I'm Archie Goodwin, and tonight I'll take you back to the 1940s, that golden era of fedoras, typewriters, and mysteries that unfold like a fine orchid under Nero Wolfe's discerning eye. Our story? Death in the Riverside Library Vault. But before we dive in, tell me in the comments, if you could set a mystery anywhere in New York, where would it be? The bustling streets of Manhattan, or the shadowy alleys of Brooklyn? Your ideas might inspire our next adventure. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Summons from the Stacks. It was a drizzly Tuesday in October 1945, the kind of day where the rain pattered against the windows like impatient fingers tapping out a Morse code message of gloom. New York City, post-war, was a mix of triumphant energy and lingering shadows. Soldiers back from Europe and the Pacific, ration books finally gathering dust, but the scars of the conflict still fresh in everyone's minds. I was holed up in the office of the old brownstone on West 35th Street, the sanctum sanctorum of Nero Wolfe, the greatest detective this side of the Atlantic, or so he'd have you believe. My desk was a battlefield of its own. Stacks of correspondence, a half-finished report on our last case, involving a pilfered recipe for some exotic fish stew that Wolfe had deemed essential to civilization, and my trusty typewriter clicking away under my fingers like a loyal sidekick. The war had changed things, even for us. Wolfe, with his immovable bulk and his unyielding routines, breakfast in bed, orchids in the plant rooms twice a day, beer by the quart, had somehow navigated the shortages with the finesse of a man who considered deprivation a personal affront. Me? I'd spent a chunk of those years in uniform, dodging bullets in Italy, but now I was back, playing the role of Legman's secretary and occasional thorn in Wolfe's side. Life had settled into a rhythm. Cases that paid the bills, Fritz Brenner's culinary miracles in the kitchen, and the occasional verbal sparring match with Inspector Kramer of the Homicide Squad. That afternoon, as the clock on the wall ticked toward 4, I was deep into transcribing notes. The case had been a yawn. Some society dame convinced her chef was sabotaging her dinner parties, but it paid well, and Wolfe had solved it without leaving his chair as usual. The phone on my desk shattered the quiet with its shrill ring, the kind that demands attention like a drill sergeant barking orders. I snatched it up on the second trill. "Wolfe Residence, Archie Goodwin speaking." My voice was crisp, professional, the product of years honing it to cut through nonsense. On the other end was a voice I knew all too well. Gruff, perpetually irritated, like sandpaper on raw nerves. "Inspector Kramer. Goodwin. That you? Listen, I need Wolfe down here pronto. We've got a stiff in the vault at the Riverside Library. Locked room, no signs of forced entry, and the victim's a heavyweight in the rare book world, Harlan Everett. Smells like murder, and the brass is breathing down my neck." I leaned back in my chair, the springs creaking in protest, and pictured Kramer's red face, his cigar clamped between his teeth, probably pacing in some echoing hall. The Riverside Library, now that was a name that conjured images of grandeur. Perched on Riverside Drive overlooking the Hudson, it was one of those Beaux-Arts beauties from the turn of the century. All marble facades, towering columns, and rooms lined with leather-bound tomes that whispered secrets of bygone eras. I'd been there once or twice, chasing leads on stolen manuscripts or verifying alibis for bookish suspects. A vault murder. That had potential for the kind of puzzle Wolfe relished, the intellectual equivalent of a 7-course meal. "Hold your horses, Inspector," I replied, keeping my tone light to needle him a bit. "Wolfe's in the middle of his plant room ritual. You know how he is about interruptions. Worse than a cat with a hairball. What's the skinny? Give me details so I can pry him loose." Kramer growled, the sound rumbling through the line like distant thunder. "Details? Everett was found this morning by the head librarian. Skull caved in with what looks like a hefty volume on heraldry. Ironic, huh? The vault's a fortress, steel door, combination lock, no windows, vents too small for a mouse. Door was locked from the inside, key still in the slot. No one in or out after Everett entered last night around 8. We've got suspects crawling out of the woodwork, rival collectors, a weepy widow, even the librarian herself. But Wolfe's got that brain of his. Maybe he can make sense of it before the press turns this into a circus." I jotted notes on a pad, my pencil scratching furiously. Harlan Everett. Yeah, I'd heard the name. A tycoon in antiquarian books, the kind who threw around fortunes at auctions for illuminated manuscripts or first edition Shakespeare folios. Rumours swirled about his shady dealings during the war, smuggling rare items out of occupied Europe. If someone had bumped him off in a locked vault, it screamed set up, the sort of conundrum that would have Wolfe's synapses firing like 4th of July fireworks. "All right, Kramer, I'll work my magic. But you know the drill. He doesn't budge for peanuts. What's in it for him?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Wolfe didn't chase glory. He chased fees and occasionally the sheer pleasure of outsmarting the police. Just get him here, Goodwin. Tell him it's a challenge to his genius. And if he solves it, I'll eat my hat. Or at least buy him a case of that fancy beer he guzzles. Kramer hung up with a click, leaving me staring at the receiver. Pushing back from the desk, I straightened my tie. A natty number in navy, blue, courtesy of a grateful client, and headed for the elevator. Wolfe would be up in the plant rooms, 4 stories above, tending his 10,000 orchids with Theodore Horstman, his horticultural wizard. The ride up was smooth, the old cage humming like a contented bee. As the doors opened, the humid air hit me, thick with the scent of earth and exotic blooms, cattleyas, odontoglossums, the works. Wolfe was there, his massive frame, somewhere north of 1/7 of a ton, clad in yellow pajamas that could double as a circus tent, peering at a hybrid through his magnifying glass. "Mr. Wolfe," I said, stepping carefully around pots of soil. "Kramer's on the warpath. Murder at the Riverside Library. Locked vault, bashed head, the whole shebang. He's begging for your input." Wolfe didn't look up immediately. His lips pursed in that way that meant he was weighing the interruption against the sanctity of his schedule. Finally, he set down the glass and turned, his dark eyes sharp as tacks. "Confound it, Archie. Libraries are bastions of civilization, repositories of human achievement, not abattoirs for the uncouth. What manner of barbarism is this?" His voice was a rich baritone, cultured, with a trace of the old-world accent he'd never fully shed. I relayed Kramer's spiel, embellishing just enough to hook him. The impossibility of the locked room, the victim's prominence, the potential for intellectual gymnastics. Wolfe grunted, a sound like a volcano rumbling, and folded his arms over his expansive belly. Very well. Inform the inspector we shall attend. But first, summon Saul Panzer if need be for preliminary reconnaissance. And Archie, ensure Fritz prepares an adequate luncheon beforehand. One does not confront murder on an empty stomach. Back downstairs, I made the calls. Kramer to confirm. Saul to stand by if we needed his freelance sleuthing skills. Fritz, our Swiss chef extraordinaire, was already in the kitchen conjuring up miracles, roast pheasant with chestnut stuffing perhaps, or one of Wolfe's favourites like Chadreau. As I waited, I pondered the case. Locked rooms were a staple in the detective game, from Poe's Rue Morgue to the modern pulps, but real life, rare as hen's teeth. How had the killer pulled it off? Poison? No, Kramer said, bashed skull. Trapdoor? Unlikely in a modern vault. Accomplice? Maybe. My mind raced, piecing together hypotheticals. An hour later, fortified by Fritz's repast, we were en route. Wolfe squeezed into the back of the Heron sedan, his preferred chariot, custom-built to accommodate his girth, while I drove, navigating the slick streets of Manhattan. The rain had eased to a mist, fogging the windows, and the city blurred by. Yellow cabs honking, pedestrians in trench coats hustling under umbrellas, newsboys hawking headlines about Truman's latest policies. We pulled up to the library, its facade looming like a sentinel against the grey sky. Cops milled about the entrance, flashing badges and barking orders, while a gaggle of reporters strained against the barricades, pencils poised. Inside, the air was cooler, redolent of polished wood and aged paper. A comforting aroma that spoke of quiet scholarship. The main hall echoed with our footsteps, chandeliers casting golden light on rows of reading tables, and shelves groaning under volumes. Kramer met us in the foyer, his hat crumpled in one fist, face florid. About time, Wolfe. The body's in the vault downstairs. Follow me! We descended to the basement level, past secured doors and humming fluorescent lights. A far cry from the elegance above. The vault itself was a steel-reinforced chamber, about 20 by 30 feet, lined with climate-controlled cases housing the library's treasures. Ancient scrolls, Gutenberg fragments, illuminated Bibles. Everett's body lay sprawled near a central table, blood matted in his silver hair. The offending book, a massive tome on medieval coats of arms, beside him, its cover stained crimson. The door, thick as a bank safe, stood ajar now, but Kramer assured us it had been locked tight when discovered. Wolfe surveyed the scene from the threshold, refusing to enter. His aversion to corpses was legendary. Archie, describe it precisely. I obliged, noting the lack of struggle signs, the key in the internal lock, the undisturbed dust on the floor except for Everett's footprints. No weapons other than the book, no fingerprints yet identified beyond the victims. As Wolfe's questions flowed, timelines, access logs, witnesses, I felt the familiar thrill. This was no ordinary killing. It was a riddle wrapped in enigma, the kind that would keep listeners guessing. But as I scanned the shelves, one detail nagged. A faint scuff on a lower panel, barely visible. Was it nothing, or the first thread to unravel? Chapter 2. The Cast of Suspects. The Riverside Library's basement vault still hung heavy with the chill of death, as Wolfe and I wrapped up our initial survey. Kramer had ushered us back upstairs to the librarian's office, a cosy nook tucked behind the main reading room. All oak panelling, green-shaded lamps, and shelves crammed with catalogues and reference tomes. The air up here was a relief. laced with the faint perfume of ink and old bindings rather than the metallic tang of blood. Wolfe eased his bulk into the oversized leather chair behind the desk, the furniture groaning under the strain like it was auditioning for a horror flick. He adjusted his position twice, lips twitching in that familiar grimace of discomfort. Anything less than his custom-built throne back home was an insult to his dignity. "Beer, Archie," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that brooked no argument. "And make it prompt. This establishment surely has provisions for civilized refreshment." I shot a glance at Kramer, who rolled his eyes but nodded to a young sergeant hovering by the door. "Get the man his beer, Riley, and a cigar for me while you're at it." The kid scampered off, leaving us in a momentary hush, broken only by the distant murmur of cops canvassing the halls and the tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was pushing noon now, the drizzle outside turning to a steady pour that drummed against the leaded windows like Morse code spelling out trouble. I pulled up a stool, notebook in hand, ready to play stenographer, while Wolfe's brain geared up for the interrogations. This was the part where the genius did his thing, sifting through the human debris of motives, alibis, and lies like panning for gold in a muddy stream. First on the docket was Miss Evelyn Thorpe, the head librarian. She swept in like a character from one of those Gothic novels she probably shelved. Mid-40s, tall and angular, with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on a beak-like nose, and her hair pulled back in a severe bun that screamed no nonsense. Her dress was sensible wool, grey as the sky outside, and her hands fluttered like trapped birds as she sat across from Wolfe. "This is dreadful, simply dreadful," she murmured, her voice cultured but edged with a tremor. Mr. Everett was a pillar of our institution, a generous donor, a scholar of rare volumes. To think, in our vault, emphasis on dreadful. Wolfe regarded her with half-closed eyes, fingers steepled under his chin. "Madam, compose yourself. Recount the events precisely. When did you last see Mr. Everett alive?" Thorpe dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Real lace," I noted, "not the cheap stuff," and took a breath. "It was yesterday evening, around 7:30. He arrived with a new acquisition, a Renaissance manuscript he'd acquired at auction. Priceless, you understand? Illuminated pages from a Florentine scriptorium. He insisted on cataloguing it himself in the vault, as was his privilege as a trustee. I locked him in at 8, per protocol. The vault requires a key from outside to enter, but once inside, one can lock it internally for privacy. I checked the main floor, secured the building, and left by 9. This morning, at opening 10 o'clock, I went to retrieve him, but the door was still locked. I used the master key, and there he was." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, toward the rain-streaked window. I jotted it down, glancing up. "Anyone else have access? Staff? Other trustees?" "Only a handful," she replied, straightening. "The combination is known to me, the board chairman, and Mr. Everett himself. But the door was locked from inside. No one could have entered without force, and there was none." Wolfe grunted. "The manuscript, where is it now?" "Safe in its case, untouched as far as I can tell." As Thorpe spoke, I sized her up. Devoted to the library, maybe too much. Eyes a bit too bright when she mentioned Everett. Unrequited affection. Or something sharper, like resentment over a spurned advance. Wolfe dismissed her gently, and she exited with a nod, her heels clicking on the parquet floor like retreating gunfire. Next up Dr. Marcus Hale, Everett's chief rival in the cutthroat world of rare book collecting. He burst into the room like a storm cloud. A wiry man in his 50s, with a shock of white hair, a tweed suit that hung on him like it was borrowed from a scarecrow, and a perpetual scowl that could curdle milk. He plopped into the chair without invitation, crossing his legs and drumming fingers on the armrest. "This is preposterous, Wolfe, dragging me here like a common criminal. Harlan and I had our differences, but murder? Absurd." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Differences, Doctor? Elaborate." Hale leaned forward, his voice a clipped Oxford accent. He'd studied at Balliol, or so the rumours went. Professional rivalries, nothing more. We both pursued the same treasures. Incunabula, first editions, manuscripts smuggled out of war-torn Europe. Last week at Sotheby's, he outbid me on that Florentine piece. Underhanded, if you ask me. Whispers of bribery. We argued yesterday afternoon in the reading room. Voices raised, yes, but I left by 5. Went home to my apartment on the Upper East Side. Alone, alas, no alibi beyond my doorman. I interjected, pencil poised. Argument about what, exactly? The manuscript's authenticity. I suspected a forgery. Hale family expertise goes back generations. Harlan laughed it off, called me jealous. But mark my words, that thing's phony as a $3 bill. His eyes darted to Kramer, who loomed in the corner like a skeptical gargoyle. "Inspector, surely you don't suspect?" Kramer cut him off. "We suspect everyone, Doc, especially folks with grudges." Hale huffed, rising. "Then check my alibi. And Wolfe, if you unravel this, I'll eat my hat." He stormed out, leaving a whiff of pipe tobacco in his wake. Rival or killer? His motive was solid. Professional jealousy could boil over, especially with fortunes at stake. The sergeant returned then, bearing a tray with beer for Wolfe. Remmers, not his preferred brand, but it'd do. And a fresh cigar for Kramer, who lit up with a satisfied puff. Wolfe poured a glass, foam cresting perfectly, and sipped, his expression softening infinitesimally. "Archie, the widow next, and fetch the vault's inventory list from Miss Thorpe." Lydia Everett arrived like a vision from a film noir set. Late 30s, raven hair in a stylish bob, lips painted ruby red, and a mink stole draped over a black dress that hugged curves like it was custom-made for temptation. She sank into the chair with the grace of a panther, crossing silk-stockinged legs and lighting a cigarette with a gold lighter. Her eyes, green as emeralds, were dry, no tears smudging the mascara. "Gentlemen," she purred, exhaling smoke, "what a tragedy! Poor Harlan, cut down in his prime." Wolfe set down his glass. "Mrs. Everett, condolences. When did you last see your husband?" "Yesterday morning, at breakfast in our penthouse on Park Avenue. He was excited about the manuscript. Said it was the crown jewel of his collection. We argued a bit. Money troubles, you know. Harlan's bids at auctions were extravagant." She flicked ash into a tray, her gaze steady. "I spent the evening at a charity gala. The Museum of Modern Art, dozens of witnesses." I leaned in. "Enemies? Anyone who'd want him dead?" She smiled faintly, a curve of lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Darling, in Harlan's world, plenty. Rivals like that odious Hale. Debts to unsavoury lenders. War profiteers, perhaps. And, well, our marriage wasn't idyllic. Affairs on both sides, but discreet. Emphasis on discreet." Kramer snorted. "Insurance? He had a policy?" "Millions," she admitted coolly, "but I'd hardly kill for it. Divorce was easier." As she left, swaying hips, drawing eyes, I pondered. Femme fatale. Motive aplenty, money, freedom, maybe a lover in the wings. Wolfe finished his beer, belching discreetly. Archie, notations, alibis to verify. Hale's doorman, Lydia's gala guests, Thorpe's routine. I flipped through the inventory list Thorpe had provided. A sheaf of typed pages detailing the vault's contents. Rows of entries, vellum scrolls, Gutenberg leaves, Shakespeare quartos. But one line jumped out, a blank where the new manuscript should be catalogued, missing or never entered. As I showed Wolfe, his brow furrowed like ploughed earth. The afternoon wore on, more details emerging. A janitor reported hearing muffled voices from the basement around 8:30. Argument or imagination? Security logs showed no unauthorized entries, but a side door had a faulty lock, per Kramer. Red herrings piled up like autumn leaves. Wolfe rose finally, signalling the end of round 1. "Inspector, we'll reconvene at the brownstone if needed. Archie, the car." As we exited into the rain, I glanced back at the library's facade, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. The suspects were in play, but the game was just beginning. Chapter 3. Clues in the Dust. The rain had let up by the time Wolfe and I made our way back down to the vault, but the air in the library basement still felt clammy, like the inside of a forgotten tomb. Kramer's boys had cordoned off the area with yellow tape. Standard procedure, though it always struck me as a bit theatrical, like something out of a B-movie. The body of Harlan Everett had been carted off to the morgue by now, leaving behind a chalk outline on the cold concrete floor. A ghostly reminder of where he'd fallen, the hefty heraldry tome, its cover still smeared with dried blood, sat bagged as evidence on a nearby table. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that danced across the steel shelves lined with archival boxes and glass cases protecting the library's priceless artifacts. Wolfe paused at the threshold, his massive frame filling the doorway like a plug in a bottle, surveying the scene with those keen eyes that missed nothing. "Archie," he intoned, his voice echoing slightly off the walls. "Commence a meticulous examination. Begin with the floor. Dust patterns, disturbances, anomalies." Emphasis on meticulous. I nodded, pulling on a pair of gloves from my pocket. Habit from too many crime scenes where fingerprints could make or break a case. The vault wasn't pristine. A fine layer of dust coated the less trafficked areas, the kind that accumulates in places where air circulation is minimal and human traffic rare. Kneeling down, I shone my flashlight across the expanse, starting from the door and working inward. Everett's footprints were clear enough. A set of polished Oxfords leading from the entrance to the central table where he'd been working on that Renaissance manuscript. They meandered a bit, as if he'd paced while thinking, then stopped abruptly near the body outline. But here's the kicker. Faint impressions, almost ghostly, branched off toward a far shelf, partial soles that didn't match Everett's size 10s. They led to a row of leather-bound ledgers, then vanished like a trail in the sand wiped clean by the tide. No prints near the chalk outline except Everett's own, and those were smudged, as if he'd staggered before the blow. "Boss!" I called over my shoulder. "We've got extra tracks here. Smaller shoes, maybe a 9, heading to the shelves, but cutting off cold. No exit marks." Wolfe grunted from his vantage point, refusing to step inside, his phobia of confined spaces mixed with a general disdain for physical exertion. "Intriguing. Photograph them if possible, Archie, and inspect the shelves for displacements." I snapped a few shots with the pocket camera I always carried. Nothing fancy, but good enough for notes. Then rose to check the racks. The air down here was musty, heavy with the scent of aging paper and mildew, the kind that clings to your clothes long after you've left. As I ran my fingers along the spines, careful not to disturb more than necessary, something caught my eye. A ledger slightly askew, its edge protruding a fraction more than its neighbours. Pulling it out, I flipped it open, pages filled with neat handwriting, entries dating back to the war years. Black market deals by the look of it. Rare folio from Berlin, acquired via neutral channels, $5,000. Illuminated Salter, Swiss intermediary, exchanged for bonds. Everett's name popped up repeatedly, alongside others I didn't recognize. Motive? This could be dynamite. Smuggling artifacts during the conflict, when Nazis were looting Europe left and right. If someone wanted to silence him... Before I could ponder further, Sergeant Stebbins, pearly to his pals though I wasn't one, poked his head in. "Goodwin, the coroner's prelims are in. Blow to the back of the skull, consistent with that book. Time of death, around 8:47 p.m., based on the stopped watch and body temp. No defensive wounds, so surprise attack." I nodded, tucking the ledger under my arm. "Thanks, Pearly. Any prints on the weapon?" He shook his head, his face as expressive as a brick wall. "Just Everett's, clean otherwise." Wolfe, overhearing, motioned me closer. "The watch? Describe it," I relayed. A gold pocket watch, chain snapped as if yanked in a struggle, hands frozen at 8:47. "Curious," Wolfe murmured. "And the note, Archie? Kramer mentioned a cryptic missive. Ah yes, the pocket contents. I'd gone through them earlier, under Kramer's watchful eye. Wallet with cash untouched, ruling out robbery, keys, a fountain pen, and a folded scrap of paper." Unfolding it now, I read aloud. "The vault holds more than books. Beware the shadow of the past." Handwritten, elegant script, no signature. "Red herring," I mused, handing it to Wolfe. He examined it through his magnifying glass, sniffing it subtly. Old habits from his Montenegro days, I supposed. Possibly. Or a genuine warning. Confront Dr. Hale with it. He mentioned similar communiques. We adjourned back to the librarian's office for that, Wolfe reclaiming his chair with a sigh of relief. Hale was summoned, arriving red-faced and blustering. "What now, Wolfe? More accusations?" "The note, Doctor," Wolfe said, sliding it across. "Familiar." Hale peered at it, his scowl deepening. "Similar to warnings I've sent collectors about forgeries, anonymous tips, you understand, to protect the field. But this, not mine. The phrasing's off, too poetic. I'd be direct. Suspect counterfeit." He pushed it back, but his fingers trembled slightly. Bluffing, or truthful. I made a mental note to check his handwriting later. As Hale left, Miss Thorpe returned at Wolfe's request, perching on the edge of her seat like a bird ready to flee. "The library's history, madam," Wolfe began. "Any architectural peculiarities? Hidden compartments, perhaps?" She hesitated, adjusting her spectacles. "Well, there's a rumour of a secret passage, from Prohibition days. The building was a speakeasy front back then. Bootleggers used tunnels to smuggle hooch. But it's sealed, bricked up decades ago, in the basement, behind the east wall. Pronunciation Thorpe, as in Thorpe." My ears perked up. "Sealed, or just hidden?" She shrugged. "I've never seen it. Just old blueprints in the archives." Wolfe nodded. "Archie, investigate." Back to the vault I went, armed with a flashlight and a pry bar borrowed from maintenance. The east wall, solid panelling over concrete, but as I tapped along it, a hollow echo sounded near the floor. Probing further, my fingers found a seam, cleverly disguised as wood grain. A loose panel, hinged subtly. Pushing it aside revealed a narrow crawl space, dusty and cobweb festooned, leading into darkness. I shone the light in. Footprints in the grime, recent by the lack of settled dust, and at the far end, a small alcove with another ledger. No, scraps of paper, receipts maybe. Crawling in, cursing my suit all the while, I retrieved them. More black market notations linking Everett to Hale and even Thorpe's father, a pre-war importer. "The motive thickens," Wolfe said when I emerged, filthy but triumphant, handing over the fines. Emphasis on thickens. We pored over the documents. Entries hinted at wartime espionage, books as covers for coded messages, artifacts traded for intelligence. Everett profiting, Hale perhaps complicit, Thorpe's family tangled in collaboration rumours. But discrepancies nagged, dates overlapping with alibis, sums that didn't add up. Wolfe's brow furrowed as he cross-referenced with the inventory list. Archie, something discordant. The manuscript described as Florentine, but these notes reference a Venetian origin. Forgery, after all. The afternoon stretched, clues mounting like puzzle pieces in a jigsaw without a box top. A smudged fingerprint on the panel. Whose? Dust from the passage on Everett's shoes, but not matching the faint tracks. And the watch? Why stopped precisely? Tampered with to mislead? Kramer dropped by, cigar in mouth. "Progress, Wolfe, or just spinning wheels?" Wolfe waved him off. "Patience, Inspector. The dust settles, revealing truths." As we wrapped for the day, packing evidence for the brownstone, I couldn't shake it. The passage opened possibilities, but sealed motives tighter. Who knew about it? And why plant the note, if not to divert? Chapter 4. Interrogations and Intrigue. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the Riverside Library's main reading room, casting long shadows across the polished oak tables and the rows of leather-bound volumes that lined the walls like silent sentinels. We'd herded the suspects here. Miss Evelyn Thorpe, Dr. Marcus Hale and Lydia Everett, under Kramer's watchful eye, turning the scholarly sanctuary into an impromptu interrogation chamber. The air was thick with tension, mingled with the faint aroma of beeswax polish and aged paper, a comforting backdrop that did little to ease the undercurrent of suspicion. Wolfe had commandeered a massive armchair at the head of a long table, his bulk settling into it with the authority of a judge on the bench. He surveyed the group with those piercing eyes, comparing them aloud to his beloved orchids, beautiful specimens, each with their hidden thorns. "Madam, gentlemen," he began, his voice a resonant baritone that filled the room without effort. "We convene not for accusations, but illumination. The truth, like a rare bloom, requires careful cultivation." Emphasis on illumination. I stood off to the side, notebook in hand, playing the role of observer and enforcer. Kramer paced near the door, his cigar sending lazy curls of smoke toward the vaulted ceiling, while a couple of uniforms flanked the exits to discourage any sudden departures. The suspects shifted uncomfortably. Thorpe perched primly on the edge of her chair, hands folded in her lap like a schoolmarm. Hale slouched with arms crossed, his scowl deepening by the minute. Lydia lounged with feline grace, cigarette in hand, exhaling smoke rings that dissipated like fleeting alibis. It was a tableau straight out, of one of those detective yarns Wolfe occasionally deigned to read. Suspects assembled, secrets simmering, and the great brain ready to probe. Wolfe started with Lydia, his gaze steady. "Mrs. Everett, elucidate your relationship with the deceased. Candor, if you please." She met his eyes without flinching, taking a slow drag before replying. "Harlan and I were married for 12 years. A union of convenience, really. He had his books, I had my social whirl. But lately, tensions, money squabbles mostly. His auctions drained our accounts." She paused, glancing at Hale, who stiffened. "And yes, there was an affair, with Marcus here, but it ended months ago. Harlan knew, he even joked about it over brandy one night. No motive for murder there. Divorce papers were already drawn." The room stirred. Thorpe's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, her spectacles slipping down her nose as she adjusted them hastily. Hale exploded upright. "Lydia, you promised discretion!" But Wolfe waved him down. "Doctor, your turn. Confirm or refute." Hale sank back, rubbing his temples. "It's true. A foolish dalliance, born of shared passions for rare texts. Harlan confronted me weeks ago, demanded repayment for a loan I'd defaulted on. 50,000 from a botched investment in illuminated manuscripts out of Italy. War disruptions, you see. Shipments lost. But kill him? Preposterous. I'd lose more in scandal." I jotted it all down, my pencil flying. Affairs, debts, classic motives, but tangled like a knot in a shoelace. Wolfe turned to Thorpe, his tone gentler. "Miss Thorpe, your sentiments toward Mr. Everett." She hesitated, twisting her handkerchief. "I admired him greatly. His knowledge, his generosity to the library, perhaps more than professionally. He was kind, listened to my ideas on cataloguing, but unrequited. He saw me as a colleague, nothing more. Jealousy, absurd. I devoted my life to this place. Harming a patron would destroy it." Wolfe nodded, sipping from a glass of beer that Sergeant Riley had fetched earlier. "Lukewarm now, but better than nothing. Archie, verify alibis while I ponder." That was my cue. Slipping out of the reading room, I headed to the foyer, where a phone booth stood like a confessional. First call, Hale's doorman on the Upper East Side. "Yeah, Doc Hale came in around 6 last night," the gruff voice confirmed. "Looked steamed, muttering about auctions, stayed in all evening. I buzzed him for a delivery at 8. Shaky, but plausible. Doorman could be bought or mistaken. Next, Lydia's charity gala at the Museum of Modern Art. The organizer, a bubbly socialite type, hedged. Mrs. Everett. She arrived fashionably late, around 8:30, mingled till 11, but she stepped out for a smoke around 9, gone maybe 20 minutes. Long enough for a quick cab to the library? Possible, with traffic light. Thorpe's alibi was her own word. Locking up alone, home by 9:30 in her modest Brooklyn flat. Neighbours might confirm, but that'd take legwork. Back in the reading room, I relayed the findings sotto voce to Wolfe, who absorbed them with a faint nod. The suspects eyed each other warily, the air crackling with unspoken accusations. Kramer, grown impatient, interjected. "Wolfe, cut the theatrics. We've got means, that book, and opportunity locked tight. Motive points to the wife. Insurance payouts hefty." Lydia shot him a withering look. "Inspector, please. I'd sooner pawn my jewels than bash Harlan with a dusty old tome." But Wolfe dismissed the notion with a flick of his hand. "Too facile, Inspector. Consider the temporal discrepancy." He gestured to the evidence bag on the table, containing Everett's pocket watch. "Archie, elucidate." I pulled it out carefully. Gold case engraved with initials, chain intact now, but noted as snapped in the report. The watch stopped at 8:47 p.m., matching the coroner's estimate. But Miss Thorpe, you said the library's grandfather clock chimed 9 when you left, and the janitor heard voices at 8:30. If Everett was alone... Thorpe blinked. The clock? It's accurate. I set it myself daily. Hale leaned forward. Manipulation. Someone stopped the watch to fake the time. Lydia scoffed. Or it broke in the fall. But Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Precisely. The crystal is intact. Mechanism jammed deliberately, perhaps. Archie, inspect. Under the lamp, I saw it. A tiny dent on the winding stem, as if pried. Tampered with post-mortem. That'd require access after the kill. The interrogations deepened. Wolfe pressed Hale on the affair's end. Mutual or acrimonious? Hale admitted friction. Lydia wanted more. I prioritized my collection. Lydia countered. He was jealous of Harlan's acquisitions. Thorpe, quieter, revealed overhearing arguments between Everett and Hale days prior. About forgeries, Dr. Hale accused Harlan of dealing in fakes. As shadows lengthened, the room grew stuffy, tempers fraying. I slipped out again, this time to Taylor Lead, the side door with the faulty lock Kramer mentioned. Outside in the alley slick with rain residue, I spotted cigarette butts near the basement access. Fresh, lipstick-stained. Lydia's brand, and a scuff mark on the door jamb, like a forced entry attempted but abandoned. Back inside, I whispered to Wolfe. He incorporated it seamlessly. Mrs. Everett, your gala absence? Care to explain? She faltered. A phone call. Personal. Kramer grumbled. This is getting us nowhere. But Wolfe, ever the dramatist, leaned back. On the contrary, threads emerge. The suspects dispersed for a break. Thorpe to her office, Hale to pace the stacks, Lydia to powder her nose. I followed Hale discreetly, weaving through the labyrinth of bookshelves, where whispers of forgotten knowledge seemed to echo. He stopped at a section on Renaissance art, pulling a volume, nervous habit, or searching. Dusk fell, the library's lights flickering on with a soft hum. As I returned to the reading room, a shadow flitted at the edge of my vision. Someone lurking in the stacks. I pursued, footsteps muffled on carpet, but found only an empty aisle. A book tumbled to the floor. The Shadow of the Past. Title of the volume, echoing the note. Coincidence? Wolfe, informed, murmured, Surveillance intensifies the intrigue. The pieces were aligning, but jaggedly, alibis cracking, motives intertwining. Night cloaked the city outside, rain resuming its patter against the pane. Chapter 5. Red herrings abound. The blackout hit like a sucker punch from the dark, plunging the Riverside Library's reading room into inky blackness that swallowed the suspects' faces and muffled their startled gasps. Rain lashed the windows outside, thunder rumbling like an ominous drumroll. And for a split second, chaos reigned, chairs scraping, footsteps shuffling, someone knocking over a lamp with a crash of glass. I lunged toward the sound of a scuffle near the stacks, my hand brushing against a bookshelf as I navigated by memory and instinct. "Hold it!" I barked. But the shadows played tricks. And by the time a backup generator hummed to life, flickering the lights back on with a hesitant buzz, the room settled into uneasy stillness. Hale stood rubbing his arm, glaring at Lydia, who smoothed her dress with feigned nonchalance. Thorpe clutched her spectacles, pale as a ghost. Kramer, ever the pro, had his revolver drawn, scanning the group. "What the hell was that?" he growled. No one confessed, but a toppled inkwell on the table hinted at a grab for documents or a diversion. Wolfe, unruffled in his armchair, adjusted his tie with deliberate calm. "A theatrical interlude, Inspector, but illuminating. Proceed with caution. Red herrings multiply like fungi in damp soil." He was right. The case was sprouting false leads faster than I could clip them. As the light stabilized, casting a yellowish glow over the assembled faces, Kramer stormed forward. His cigar clamped like a vice. "Wolfe, you're stalling. We've got a locked-room murder, suspects with holes in their stories, and now this blackout nonsense. It's the wife, plain as day. Insurance payouts $1 million, and her alibi's got more gaps than Swiss cheese." Lydia shot him a venomous look, her green eyes flashing. "Inspector, your imagination rivals a dime novel. I'd never soil my hands with such vulgarity." But Wolfe dismissed it with a wave of his massive hand, his expression one of mild exasperation, like a teacher correcting a dull pupil. "Too obvious, Inspector. A sophomoric ploy. Consider the book, the weapon itself." He gestured to the evidence bag, where the heraldry tome lay sealed, its blood-stained cover a grim artifact. "Why that volume? Symbolic or convenient?" I piped up, recalling the inventory. "It's heavy, sure, 5 pounds of medieval lore, but the vault's full of blunt objects. Why not a bust or a paperweight?" Hale interjected, his voice sharp. Heraldry was Harlan's obsession. Coats of arms, lineages. He claimed descent from some English baron. Perhaps the killer mocked him. Or framed him for something else. The thought nagged as I flipped through notes. We dispersed the suspects temporarily. Thorpe to brew tea in her office, Hale to a side room under guard, Lydia to the ladies' lounge with a female officer shadowing her. Wolfe demanded sustenance, and Kramer, grumbling, sent Riley for sandwiches from a nearby deli. Roast beef on rye for me. Something heartier for the boss. As we waited, Wolfe pondered aloud, his fingers drumming a rhythm on the armrest. "The missing volume from the inventory, Archie. Not the manuscript, but a diary alluded to in the ledger. Exposing what?" The black market scraps from the passage hinted at it. A wartime espionage ring. Books as couriers for secrets. Hale had ties to British intelligence during the war. Lydia's family had fled Austria in 1938. Whispers of collaboration. Thorpe, her father, a German émigré, had been investigated for Axis sympathies. Motives layered like an onion, each peel revealing another sting. Emphasis on layered. I took the opportunity to tail Hale again, slipping into the stacks where shadows clung like cobwebs. The library after hours was a different beast. Echoing silence broken only by the rain's tattoo and the distant hum of the city. Hale wandered the history section, pulling a book on W.O. stone cryptography. Flipping pages with feigned interest. I watched from behind a pillar, close enough to overhear his mutter, "Retrieve what's mine, before it's too late." Red herring? He shelved it abruptly, glancing around, then headed to a phone booth in the alcove. I edged closer, ear strained. "Yes, it's me," he whispered. "The diary's key. Destroy it if found." Click. Who was on the other end? Accomplice? I noted the number, a Midtown exchange for later tracing. Confronting him then would have tipped my hand, so I melted back, reporting to Wolfe. Back in the reading room, sandwiches arrived. Wolfe devoured his with the focus of a man-fueling genius, mustard dotting his chin. "Archie, the blackout, engineered?" Kramer snorted. "Fuse blew from the storm. Coincidence." But Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Coincidences are suspect. Examine the panel." Down in the basement again, past the vault steel door, I found the electrical box, wires tampered, a crude short. Sabotage, time to disrupt. Who's doing? Footprints in the dust nearby matched the smaller ones from earlier. Women's heels? Lydia or Thorpe? Regrouping, Wolfe floated a theory. Suicide, perhaps? Despondent over debts, stages a murder to frame a rival. I shook my head. Blow from behind, boss. No contortionist could manage that. Hale, overhearing as he returned, laughed bitterly. Harlan! Suicide! The man was vain as a peacock, wouldn't mar his looks. But the idea planted seeds of doubt. Another herring in the net. The phone jangled then, shattering the tension. Kramer's, line from headquarters. I answered, a gravelly voice on the other end. Tip for Wolfe. Check Silas Grant, Everett's estranged brother. Seen lurking near the library last night. Gambler. Owes big to bookies. Click. Anonymous but timely. Wolfe arched a brow. Intriguing. Summon him, Inspector. Kramer dispatched a squad car, and we waited, the storm outside mirroring the brewing one within. Grant arrived an hour later, drenched and surly, a lanky man in his 40s, cheap suit rumpled, eyes shifty as a weasel's. What's this about? I ain't seen Harlan in months. Wolfe fixed him with that stare. Your presence near the library. Explain. Grant fidgeted. All right, I was there. Demanded my share. Harlan cut me out of the will years ago. He laughed me off through the door. I left, hit a bar. Alibis the bartender at O'Malley's. Motive, inheritance grudge. But his shoes, size 11s, not matching the tracks. Another layer? Grant smirked. Heard about the diary. Harlan's wartime dirt. Worth a fortune in blackmail. As Grant was detained for verification, red herrings swam thicker. The diary as motive, perhaps stolen during the kill. Hale's phone call tied in. Lydia slipped back in, overhearing. Silas, that reprobate, always begging. But her composure cracked, a flicker of fear. Thorpe, serving tea, spilled a cup, hands trembling. The diary. I catalogued it once. Minor scandals, nothing lethal. Wolfe, sipping tea disdainfully, it wasn't beer, murmured, the net tightens, yet deceives. I tailed Lydia to the lounge, eavesdropping, a hushed call. It's escalating. Handle the loose ends. Accomplice? The web spun denser, clues clashing. Night deepened. The library, a fortress of secrets. Chapter 6. The hidden passage revealed. The creak from the basement echoed through the Riverside Library like a whisper from the grave, cutting through the storm's rumble and sending a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the draughty halls. It was well past midnight now, the witching hour when even the most rational mind starts entertaining notions of ghosts, or more likely, flesh and blood intruders slinking through shadows. Wolfe had dismissed the suspects for the night under police escort, each to their respective abodes with tales to ensure no funny business. But the anonymous tip about Silas Grant had injected fresh adrenaline into the proceedings. Kramer, ever the bulldog, had hauled Grant in. And now the estranged brother sat in the reading room under the harsh glare of a desk lamp, his cheap suit dripping rainwater onto the Persian rug like accusations pooling at his feet. He was a sorry sight. Hollow cheeks, stubble shadowing a weak chin, eyes darting like a cornered rat. Gambler down on his luck, the type who'd bet his last dime on a long shot and lose his shirt. Wolfe, fortified by a fresh delivery of beer, Remmers again, but chilled this time, eyed Grant from his armchair throne. Mr. Grant, your candour will expedite matters. Your presence at the library, elaborate. Grant shifted, his voice a whine laced with defiance. Like I told the Flatfoot, I was here last night. Harlan owed me. Family money, inheritance squandered on his damn books. I pounded on the side door around 8, yelled through the mail slot. He shouted back from inside, told me to scram or he'd call the cops. I left, hit O'Malley's for a belt. Bartender'll vouch. Kramer snorted, leaning against a bookshelf. We checked. Bartender says you showed at 9:15, nursing a whiskey till closing. Gap big enough to drive a hearse through. Grant paled. Traffic. Rain slicked the streets. But his alibi wobbled like a three-legged stool. Motive? Clear as crystal. Resentment festering since their parents' estate went to Harlan, the golden boy collector, while Silas spiraled into debt with bookies who didn't take IOUs. I jotted notes, glancing at Wolfe, whose lips pursed in that telltale sign of wheels turning. The diary, Mr. Grant. Knowledge of it? Grant's eyes widened. Heard rumours. Harlan's wartime skeletons. Figured it'd fetch a price on the black market, but I never got inside. Liars tell, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air. Wolfe set down his glass with a deliberate clink. Archie, the passage, re-examine with Mr. Grant in tow. That was my marching order. With Pearlie Stebbins flanking Grant, we descended to the basement, the stairs creaking under our combined weight like protesting bones. The vault door stood ajar now, guarded by a uniform who snapped to attention. Inside, the chalk outline stared up accusingly, the air still heavy with that metallic tang overlaid by dust. I led them to the east wall, the loose panel I'd discovered earlier. Sealed my foot, I muttered, prying it open with the crowbar. Cobwebs parted like veils, revealing the narrow tunnel. Dank, musty, a relic from the speakeasy era, when gin flowed underground and cops looked the other way. Flashlights pierced the gloom. Rough brick walls, scattered debris from decades past, broken crates, faded labels from bootleg whiskey. Grant balked at the entrance. What the hell? I ain't crawling in there. Pearlie shoved him forward. Move, or I'll drag you. On hands and knees, we inched through, dust choking the air, my knees protesting against the grit. The passage twisted left, then right, emerging into a small alcove, perhaps a storage nook for contraband. Fresh disturbances here. Scuffed dirt, a discarded cigarette butt, not Lydia's brand, and jackpot, a dusty ledger half buried under rubble. I snatched it up, flipping pages under the beam. More entries on wartime deals, but with names redacted, codes instead of specifics. Everett's handwriting, I confirmed, passing it back to Wolfe via Pearlie. But the footprints, smaller than Grant's clodhoppers, women's size perhaps, leading to a dead-end wall. No exit, but a faint draft suggested otherwise. Tapping revealed another panel, this one bricked but loose. With the crowbar, we unsealed it, bricks tumbling in a cloud of mortar dust, opening to the library's boiler room, then an exterior alley grate. Escape route, clear as day. Emphasis on escape route. Back in the reading room, coughing up dust like a miner, I laid it out for Wolfe. The killer entered via the passage, struck Everett, planted the note, escaped through the boiler to the alley. No need to lock from inside. The internal key was a ruse. Wolfe nodded, his fingers steepled. Efficacious, but footprints. Women's, heels maybe, not Grant's. Grant smirked. Told you. But Kramer wasn't buying. You could have had help, a dame accomplice. We summoned the suspects back, one by one, the night wearing thin as the storm raged outside. First Thorpe, roused from her flat, arrived dishevelled bun askew. The passage? I knew of it vaguely, from old plans, but sealed. Wolfe pressed. Usage? She broke, tears welling. All right, I used it occasionally to sneak books out for private appraisal. Donors sometimes request discretion, but not that night. I was home by 9. Her shoes? Dainty pumps, size 7, matching the prints? Possible. Motive deepened. If Everett discovered her side hustle, exposing library improprieties, Lydia next, arriving in a taxi, mink damp, composure icy. This is outrageous, dragged here at this hour. But her eyes betrayed fatigue. Confronted with the passage, she sneered. Prohibition relics? How quaint! I wouldn't dirty my knees in such filth. Yet a clue surfaced. In the alcove, a pearl earring, lustrous and solitary. I held it up. Yours? She touched her lobe. One missing. Must have lost it earlier, during my visit last week. Planted or genuine slip? Her alibi's gap loomed larger. Time enough to slip in via the alley, strike, flee. Hale, last, yawning theatrically. Tunnels? Sounds like a pulp novel. But his physics background, wartime work on gadgets for OSS, fit a clever entry. Magnets, perhaps? To manipulate the lock remotely? He scoffed. Theoretical nonsense. Yet his call earlier nagged, Destroy the diary. We found scraps in the passage, torn pages, incriminating Hale in forgery schemes. He paled. Forgeries! Harlan's lies! Wolfe assembled fragments mentally, sipping beer as thunder cracked. The diary, central, exposing not just deals, but betrayals. Grant confessed more. Harlan promised me a cut if I retrieved it quietly, but he double-crossed. Accomplice angle? Footprints didn't match. Red herrings untangled slowly. The earring likely planted to frame Lydia. Grant a patsy for distraction. Thorpe's appraisals benign. As dawn hinted grey through windows, Wolfe smiled faintly. That rare curve, signalling breakthrough. Archie, the watch, cross-reference with passage draft. The draft? From the alley grate, facing west, Hudson wins, timepiece jammed by, magnetic interference, Hale's expertise again. Chapter 7. Twists in the Tale. Dawn's grey light filtered through the Riverside Library's tall windows, turning the reading room into a washed-out watercolour of exhaustion and suspicion. We'd been at it all night, the storm finally petering out to a drizzle that tapped irregularly against the panes like a code we couldn't crack. The suspects, Thorpe, Hale, Lydia, and now Grant, had been corralled back into the space, looking as rumpled as yesterday's news. Thorpe nursed a cold cup of tea, her bun unravelling like her composure. Hale paced short circuits near the stacks, his tweed jacket askew. Lydia chain-smoked by the window, her mink draped over a chair like a discarded alibi. Grant slouched in a corner, handcuffs glinting under the lamps, courtesy of Kramer's insistence on precautionary measures. The air hung heavy with stale coffee, cigar smoke, and the undercurrent of frayed nerves, the kind of atmosphere where truths bubble up or lies solidify. Wolfe, ensconced in his armchair like a Buddha of deduction, surveyed the assembly with half-lidded eyes. His breakfast, a platter of eggs Benedict rustled up by a sympathetic deli owner, devoured with methodical precision. Ladies, gentlemen, he intoned, dabbing his lips with a napkin, we reconvene to disentangle the web. Motives, like orchids, must be examined root and stem. Emphasis on disentangle. I leaned against a bookshelf, notebook at the ready, my legs aching from the night's exertions in that infernal passage. The hidden tunnel had blown the case wide open. No more impossible locked room. just clever misdirection via Prohibition-era architecture. But twists abounded. The pearl earring, the diary scraps, the tampered watch. Wolfe started with Grant, his voice a velvet hammer. "Mr. Grant, your fiscal desperation, elucidate." Grant straightened, chains rattling. "Simple. Harlan hogged the family dough. I needed cash to square with the sharks. 10 grand or they'd break my knees. He promised a loan if I fetched that diary from the vault. Said it had dirt on bigwigs, worth plenty. But when I showed via the alley grate, he reneged. We argued through the wall. I stormed off. Next thing, he's dead." Kramer interjected, chomping his cigar. "Convenient. Your prints in the alcove?" Grant shrugged. "From scouting earlier, but I didn't kill him. Too squeamish for blood. Motive solid. Opportunity via passage, but those smaller footprints nagged. Accomplice?" Wolfe shifted to Hale, his gaze piercing. "Doctor, your vendetta!" Hale stopped pacing, hands clasped behind his back like a professor lecturing. "Revenge, poppycock, professional rivalry, yes. Harlan undercut me at auctions, spread rumours of my forgeries. But murder? I'd sooner burn a Gutenberg. My motive's intellectual, exposing his wartime scams. That diary? Proof he trafficked Nazi-looted art. I warned him anonymously, but he laughed." Lydia snorted smoke. "You mean you coveted his collection? Admit it, Marcus. Our affair was cover for snooping." Hale flushed. "Lies. The affair was genuine, until you eyed his insurance." The room crackled with barbs. Wolfe turned to Thorpe, gentler but firm. "Miss Thorpe, your emotional entanglement?" She blushed, spectacles fogging. "Jealousy. Preposterous. I admired Harlan, his passion for preservation. But, yes, unrequited affection. He confided in me about the diary, asked me to hide it in the passage. I did, for the library's sake. Scandals could ruin donations, but kill, never." Pronunciation Thorpe, as in Thorpe. Her hands trembled. Motive, spurned love, or protecting institutional secrets? Finally, Lydia, extinguishing her cigarette with a twist. "And me? Freedom from a loveless marriage, darling. Harlan's obsessions left me bankrupt in spirit and purse. But I'd planned divorce, not death. The insurance? Icing, but hardly worth the noose." Wolfe nodded, absorbing it all like a sponge. "Motives intertwine. Pecuniary, vengeful, amorous, liberating. Yet discrepancies persist. That's when a new twist surfaced, courtesy of a courier from the probate office, summoned by Kramer overnight. The envelope contained Everett's will, dated just last week. I scanned it under Wolfe's directive. Bulk of the estate, millions in books and cash, to the library, a pittance to Lydia, nothing to Grant. Lydia's eyes widened, colour draining. "He changed it? That bastard? Last week after our row." She fumed, pacing now. "I knew nothing." But her reaction screamed foreknowledge, or shock genuine. Red herring. If she knew, motive amplified. If not, perhaps innocent. Wolfe murmured, "Archie, scrutinize the signature." I did, under a magnifying glass borrowed from the reference desk. The ink flowed unevenly, loops inconsistent with samples from Everett's logs. "Forged, boss. Expert job, subtle flourishes mismatched." Hale, overhearing, protested vehemently. "Me! My document expertise is archival, not criminal." But his background fit. Wartime forgeries for OSS, crafting fake passports. Motive twist. If Hale forged the will to frame Lydia, or inherit via some clause? He denied, sweat beading. "Absurd. Check the notary. It's legitimate." But the notary was a library volunteer, Thorpe's assistant, complicit. The assembly devolved into accusations. Grant blaming Hale for roping him in. Lydia accusing Thorpe of jealousy-fueled forgery. Thorpe pointing to Lydia's affair as cover for theft. Hale decrying all as smears. Kramer bellowed for order, his face beet red. "Wolfe, make sense of this circus." Wolfe, unruffled, called for beer, fresh bottles arriving via Riley, and sipped thoughtfully. "Archie, the note from Everett's pocket. Procure it." I fetched the evidence bag, the cryptic scrap. The vault holds more than books. Beware the shadow of the past. Wolfe examined it anew, then directed, "Analyze the ink, fresh or aged." I improvised with library supplies. A chemistry kit from the reference section. Basic tests for composition. Under Wolfe's guidance, a drop of solvent revealed. No oxidation. Pigment. Vibrant. Fresh, boss. Not more than a day old. Planted post-mortem. Emphasis on planted. The room hushed. If planted after death, killer returned. But passage sealed, door locked. Twist. Perhaps 2 entries or an inside job. Everett not alone. Hale blustered. "My warnings were typed, not handwritten." Thorpe admitted similar notes to donors, but denied this. Lydia? "My handwriting's loops, not slants." Grant laughed. "Not me. Can't spell beware without a dictionary." Wolfe pondered. The will forgery linking to the note. Same ink type? Preliminary match. A confluence, he said. The forger and planter one and the same. Accusations flew anew. Lydia at Hale. Your OSS tricks. Hale at Grant. Your gambling cronies forge checks. Grant at Thorpe. Library fakes provenance all the time. Thorpe weeping denial. Tension peaked. Voices overlapping in a cacophony of blame. I slipped out amid the chaos, checking the passage once more. Dust settled, but a fresh smudge on the panel. Someone recent. Returning, I whispered to Wolfe. His eyes gleamed. Twists piled, will as motive multiplier, forgery as clue, ink as timeline breaker. Dawn brightened, but shadows deepened. Chapter 8. Shadows and Secrets. The shadow in the alcove moved like a whisper in the wind. A fleeting glimpse that set my nerves jangling like a phone off the hook. It was mid-morning now. The Riverside Library bathed in the watery light of a post-storm sun, but the atmosphere inside remained thick as pea soup. Suspicions simmering, tempers on a short fuse. We'd been grinding through twists all night and into day. The forged will, the planted note, the ink analysis painting a picture of deception layered thicker than Fritz's strudel. Wolfe had just floated his latest hypothesis when the movement caught my eye. A dark figure slipping toward the basement stairs. "Hold it!" I shouted, bolting from my perch by the bookshelf. The room erupted, chairs scraping, Kramer barking orders, suspects freezing like statues in a wax museum. I pounded down the corridor, footsteps echoing off the marble like gunfire in a canyon. My .38 snug in its shoulder holster if things turned ugly. The shadow vanished around a corner, but I was gaining, my legs pumping from years of chasing leads through New York's labyrinthine streets. Bursting into the alley via the side door, that faulty lock now propped open for ventilation, I spotted him. Silas Grant, scrambling over a low fence like a rat deserting a sinking ship. "Grant, freeze!" He glanced back, eyes wild, then tripped on a loose cobble, sprawling in a puddle. I tackled him before he could scramble up, knee in his back, wrenching his arms behind. "Going somewhere, pal!" Pearly Stebbins thundered out seconds later, cuffs ready, hauling Grant to his feet. A quick frisk revealed the prize. Tucked in his coat, a slim leather-bound volume, the missing diary, its cover embossed with faded gold lettering. "That's mine," Grant yelped, struggling. "Harlan gave it to me. Payment for old debts." Liar's pants on fire. His hands were clean as a whistle. No trace of the vault's dust or the passage's grime. We dragged him back inside, plunking him in a chair under the reading room's chandelier, where Wolfe waited like a spider in its web. The diary lay open on the table now, pages yellowed but legible, chronicling Everett's wartime exploits. Coded entries on artifact smuggling, names of contacts in neutral Switzerland, hints of intelligence traded for treasures looted from occupied galleries. No earth-shattering scandals, just enough dirt to embarrass high society types who dabbled in grey market deals during the blackout years. But valuable for blackmail. Absolutely, if you knew the right ears to whisper into. Grant stuck to his story. He slipped it through the alley grate last week, said it was hush money. I stashed it, came back to fence it after. But the timeline stank. Diary noted as vault inventory days ago. Planted tale or partial truth? Wolfe, fingers steepled under his chin, reconstructed the crime with the precision of a watchmaker assembling gears. Mr. Everett entered the vault alone at 8, as per Miss Thorpe, locking the door internally for seclusion. The assailant, privy to the passage, infiltrated via the alley grate, unseen, unheard amid the evening bustle. A confrontation ensued, perhaps over the diary's contents. The blow struck from behind with the heraldry tome. Ironic, given Everett's heraldic pretensions. Escape through the passage, resealing the panel with practiced ease. But the conundrum, the door locked from inside, key undisturbed. His voice rolled like distant thunder, the suspects hanging on every word. Kramer chewed his cigar stub. So, how'd they pull the lock trick? Ghost through steel? That's when the clue surfaced, courtesy of Hale's own background. I'd been poring over his file. Wartime OSS gadgets, magnetic relays for remote detonations. Magnets, boss, I ventured. Wolfe nodded approvingly. Precisely, Archie. A hidden device, perhaps a solenoid or electromagnetic pulley, affixed covertly to manipulate the key from the passage side. Physics elementary for one versed in such arcana. Hale looped up, face apoplectic. Outrageous! My work was for the Allies. Saboteur circuits, yes, but not this. Prove it. But the fit was snug. His apartment search warrant, pending Kramer's nod, might yield tools. Motive? The diary named Hale in a forgery ring, faked provenances for looted art. Profit split with Everett until a fallout. You killed him to silence the exposure, Lydia accused, her voice a silken blade. Hale sneered. And you, that earring in the passage, your trail. Thorpe, who'd been quiet as a mouse, broke then, her prim facade cracking like thin ice. Wait, I must confess something. Emphasis on confess. She adjusted her spectacles, voice trembling. I helped Harlan hide the diary. He feared Hale's prying, rumours of theft. We stashed it in the alcove days ago, via the passage, but I swear, I locked up and left. No murder. Partial truth, but damning. Her knowledge of the tunnel, her unrequited crush perhaps twisted into complicity. Grant chuckled darkly. See, everyone's dirty. Harlan played us all. Lydia rolled her eyes. Spare the drama, Silas. You lurked for a handout. The shadows of secrets deepened as we delved. Kramer dispatched teams, one to scour Hale's lab for magnetic gadgets, another to verify Thorpe's home alibi with neighbours. I tailed a lead myself, slipping out to O'Malley's, the bar Grant claimed. The barkeep, a grizzled vet with a glass eye, confirmed, yeah, Silas showed round 9:20, soaked and surly. Bought rounds like he hit the numbers. But a backdoor exit? Unlocked? Alley adjacent to the libraries? Gap enough for a detour murder? Possible. Back at the library, fresh twists. Lab report on the notes ink matched a pen from Thorpe's desk. Standard issue, but fingerprints, hers and Everett's. Planted by her, Hale crowed. Thorpe gasped, "No, Harlan borrowed it last week." Wolfe orchestrated from his chair, demands for beer met by a weary Riley. "Archie, the watch, re-examine. The gold timepiece, hands frozen at 8:47. Under magnification, the stem showed tool marks, not from fall, but prying. Tampered to mislead timeline, Wolfe declared. Killer adjusted post-strike, aligning with alibis. Lydia's gala gap fit, out for smoke at 9, but watch set back? Or Hale, his dormant alibi porous? Grant's bar arrival post-dated. Thorpe's solo lockup. Secrets shadowed each. Lydia's call overheard, handle loose ends, perhaps to offence for the diary. Hale's mutter, retrieve what's mine. As noon approached, accusations swirled like leaves in a gale. Grant at Hale, your gadgets did the lock. Hale at Lydia, your earring frames you. Lydia at Thorpe, jealous spinster. Thorpe weeping, all lies. Kramer bellowed for silence, his patience threadbare. Wolfe, pin it, or I'll charge 'em all as accessories. Wolfe's eyes gleamed, that rare spark of impending revelation. Patience, Inspector, the mosaic assembles, shadows yield to light. But doubts lingered. The earring planted to divert? Diary's true secrets buried deeper? I stepped out for air. Alley air crisp with autumn bite. A glint caught my eye. Discarded wire snippet, magnetic coil, Hale's discard? Rushing back, I presented it. Wolfe examined. Corroborative, the device remnant. Hale blanched. Not mine. Twists tightened. Secrets unravelling thread by thread. Chapter 9. The Climactic Revelation. The midday sun streamed through the Riverside Library's windows, casting elongated shadows across the reading room that mirrored the elongated truths we were about to uncover. It had been a marathon of a case. Sleepless hours blending into a haze of clues, confessions and convolutions that would test even Wolfe's prodigious intellect. The suspects were reassembled once more, a weary tableau under the chandelier's glow. Miss Evelyn Thorpe, fidgeting with her handkerchief like it was a lifeline. Dr. Marcus Hale, arms crossed defiantly, his academic poise cracking at the edges. Lydia Everett, perched with predatory elegance, her green eyes scanning for weaknesses. And Silas Grant, still cuffed and sullen, slouched like a deflated balloon. Kramer paced the perimeter, his cigar reduced to a nub, while Pearlie Stebbins and a couple of uniforms stood sentinel at the doors. The air hummed with anticipation, thick as the dust in that infernal passage, every eye fixed on Nero Wolfe, who sat immovable in his commandeered armchair, a fresh bottle of beer at his elbow. He'd insisted on relocating to the vault for the denouement. Atmosphere aids clarity, he'd grunted, but Kramer vetoed it, citing evidence preservation. So, here we were, in the heart of the library, ready for the curtain to rise on the final act. Wolfe set down his glass with a deliberate clink, the sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. His voice, rich and measured, filled the space. Ladies and gentlemen, Inspector, the mosaic completes. Harlan Everett's murder, ostensibly an impenetrable enigma in a locked vault, unravels as a tapestry of deception, woven with threads of avarice, betrayal, and ingenuity. The perpetrator, cunning yet fallible, shall now be named. He paused, eyes sweeping the room, letting the tension build like a crescendo in one of Fritz's symphonic sources. Thorpe gasped softly. Hale stiffened. Lydia's lips parted in a faint smile. Grant smirked. Kramer halted his pacing, leaning forward. "Out with it, Wolfe! Who's the rat?" Wolfe's gaze locked on Hale. "The murderer," he declared, his tone resonant as a tolling bell, "is Dr. Marcus Hale." Emphasis on Hale. The room exploded. Hale surged to his feet, face mottled with rage. "Preposterous! Slander! I'll have your license for this, you corpulent charlatan!" Lydia laughed, a sharp bark of relief. "Marcus! Oh, darling, how fitting!" Thorpe's hand flew to her mouth. Grant chuckled darkly. "Knew it! The egghead did it!" Kramer, ever skeptical, crossed his arms. "Proof, Wolfe, or it's just hot air." Wolfe raised a hand for silence, his massive frame shifting slightly. The only concession to the drama. "Proof abounds, Inspector. Attend." He began methodically, like dissecting an orchid under glass. First, the mechanism of entry and egress. The hidden passage, a vestige of prohibition, provided access. But the internal lock, how manipulated? Not by crude force, but electromagnetic finesse. A concealed solenoid device rigged to the key via a thin wire threaded through a microscopic bore in the doorframe, drilled surreptitiously days prior, the coil fragment Archie discovered in the alley, residue from its disassembly post-crime. Hale blustered, "Circumstantial! Anyone could plant that." But Wolfe continued undeterred. "Your OSS tenure, Doctor. Designing remote triggers for wartime sabotage. Schematics in your apartment, confirmed by your warrant search, match precisely. Motive? The diary exposes your forgery syndicate. Falsified provenances for looted artifacts. Profits laundered through Everett's collections. He threatened disclosure after your fallout. Over the Florentine manuscript, a fake you peddled him." I interjected, flipping my notebook. "The footprints, boss. Those faint ones leading to the shelf, then vanishing." Wolfe nodded approvingly. "Ah, yes. Not vanished, but elevated." Dr. Hale employed stilts, disguised as extendable book retrieval poles, common in libraries. Strapped to his shoes, they lifted him above the dust layer, leaving partial impressions only at descent. His invention, patented in '42 for archival access. Ironic utility. Hale's eyes darted. "Lies! No evidence!" But Purley's team had raided his office earlier. I held up the bagged poles, adjustable legs gleaming. "These, found in your closet, fibers matching vault carpet." Wolfe pressed on, relentless. "The note. The vault holds more than books. Beware the shadow of the past." Handwriting analysis. Your elegant script, Doctor, masked but betrayed by the idiosyncratic S-loop. Ink from Thorpe's desk, borrowed under pretext during your argument with Everett, planted post-strike to evoke wartime shadows, diverting to espionage red herrings. Thorpe nodded faintly. He did visit my office that afternoon for a reference. Lydia leaned forward. "And the affair? Cover for your snooping?" Hale sneered. "Conjecture." But Wolfe unravelled further. "The watch, tampered to 8:47. Your physics acumen again, prying the stem with a tool leaving those marks. Aligning death to precede your Dorman alibi, yet the janitor's voices at 8:30 place the kill later. Your cab receipt, forged like the will, your expertise shining through. The will alteration cut Lydia out, framing her with insurance motive, but signatures mismatched Everett's flourish." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "You bastard! Ruining me posthumously." Red herrings dissolved like mist in sunlight. "The pearl earring," Wolfe continued, "planted in the passage to implicate Mrs. Everett, snatched during your liaison, Doctor. Silas Grant, A patsy, lured by promises of the diary for blackmail, his lurking a convenient distraction. You tipped anonymously, ensuring his entanglement, Grant growled. You used me, you weasel. Thorpe's confession. Innocent facilitation, hiding the diary at Everett's behest, unaware of Hale's schemes. Her unrequited affection. Mere misdirection. The black market ledgers. Bait to muddy waters, but Hale's forgeries the core rot. Hale lunged then, a desperate bid for the door, but Pearlie was quicker, tackling him to the rug with a thud that shook the shelves. Cuffs clicked shut, Hale sputtering denials. This is madness! No jury will buy it. Kramer, grudging admiration in his eyes, clamped a hand on Hale's shoulder. Save it for the DA, Doc. Wolfe, you fat genius. How'd you peg the stilts? Wolfe merely shrugged. A seismic event. Observation, Inspector. Footprints abruptly ceasing suggested elevation. The rest? Logical concatenation. As Hale was hauled away, protesting to the echoes, the room deflated. Lydia lit a cigarette, exhaling relief. Justice at last, though I'll contest that will. Thorpe straightened, a weight lifted. The library endures, thanks to you, Mr. Wolfe. Grant, uncuffed but detained for questioning, muttered thanks. Kramer grumbled, Owe you one, Wolfe, but next time, don't drag it out. Wolfe sipped beer, content. Satisfaction suffices, Inspector. But loose ends tugged. The diary's full secrets, minor indiscretions, no treason, but enough to tarnish reputations. Hale's confession came later, under interrogation. Greed twisted to murder when Everett demanded repayment and threatened exposure. Justice wheeled forward, inexorable as time. Back in the brownstone later, I'd reflect on it all. The vault's chill, the passage's dust, the shadows dispelled. But for now, as we wrapped, one anomaly lingered. Thought for 14s. Chapter 10. Justice and Orchids, the ride back to the brownstone on West 35th Street, felt like emerging from a fog-shrouded alley into the clear light of day. Even though the sun was dipping low over the Hudson, painting the city in hues of amber and rose. It was late afternoon by the time we wrapped at the Riverside Library. Hale carted off in a paddy wagon, his bluster reduced to muttered threats as Kramer's boys read him his rights. The vault's chill still clung to my bones, but the satisfaction of a case cracked wide open warmed me better than a shot of rye. Wolfe, squeezed into the back of the Heron like a cork in a bottle, gazed out the window with that post-victory serenity he reserved for moments when his brain had triumphed over barbarism. Archie, he rumbled, his voice a contented baritone. Inform Fritz we'll dine on quail en cocotte this evening, and beer, copious. I grinned at the wheel, navigating the traffic snarls of Manhattan with the ease of a native. You got it, boss. After that marathon, even I'd welcome one of his miracles. Pause. We pulled up to the old brownstone, its facade as unchanging as Wolfe's routines. Solid, unyielding, a bastion against the chaos outside. Fritz Brenner, our culinary maestro, met us at the door with that Swiss efficiency, his apron spotless, eyes twinkling at the prospect of pampering his employer. Welcome home, sir. The orchids await your inspection. Wolfe grunted approval, heading straight for the elevator to the plant rooms, his daily ritual unbroken even by murder. Me? I shed my coat, the one still dusted with vault grime, and headed to the office, the heart of our operation. My desk beckoned, the typewriter silent but expectant, ready for the report that would seal the case in black and white. As I rolled in a fresh sheet, The events replayed like a newsreel in my head. The locked vault, the bashed skull, the web of suspects unspooled thread by thread. Sitting there, fingers poised over the keys, I reflected on how it all tied up. Hale's confession came swift once Kramer's interrogators leaned in, the evidence piling like a house of cards collapsing under its own weight. He'd rigged the magnetic device weeks prior, during a research visit to the vault, drilling that tiny hole under cover of cataloguing. The stilts? A prototype from his lab, tested on those very shelves. Motive boiled down to greed and fear. Everett had discovered the forgeries in their shared black market ventures, demanding a cut or exposure. Hale struck in panic, planting the note to evoke wartime ghosts, tampering the watch to muddle the timeline, forging the will to frame Lydia. The pearl earring, pilfered from her boudoir during their affair, a petty revenge. Grant was bait, lured with promises of the diary to create a diversion. Thorpe, innocent pawn, her affections manipulated to hide the incriminating volume. Justice served cold. Hale faced the electric chair, his academic laurels tarnished forever. No appeals likely. Too much proof, too many witnesses. Emphasis on justice served, dice. Pause. But the diary, that slim volume of secrets, revealed no bombshells, just minor indiscretions from the war years. A swapped artifact here, a coded message there, profits skimmed from chaos. Nothing criminal enough for treason charges, but sufficient to sully reputations in clubrooms and boardrooms. Everett had hoarded it as insurance, a leverage tool against partners like Hale. In the end, it went to the authorities, redacted versions perhaps trickling into history books someday. Lydia? She'd contest the will, likely win a chunk despite the forgery. Her lawyers were sharks. Thorpe returned to her stacks, the library's reputation intact, donations flowing anew. Grant skated on minor charges, his gambling debts a lingering shadow, but free to hustle another day. As I typed, the clack of keys a rhythmic counterpoint to the city's distant hum, nostalgia crept in. The 1940s, post-war glow fading into Cold War chills. But cases like this reminded me why I stuck with Wolfe. Not for the fees, though they paid the bills, but for the intellectual tango, the puzzle's satisfaction when pieces clicked. Mysteries like this one whispered that truth hides in plain sight if you look closely enough. Dust patterns, ink freshness, a scuff on a panel. Wolfe's genius, amplifying those whispers into roars. I paused, stretching, as the elevator whirred. Wolfe descending from his orchids, the plant room's humid embrace relinquished for the office's comforts. He entered, massive frame filling the doorway, yellow pajamas exchanged for his customary suit, a fresh beer in hand. The office was his domain. Walls lined with books, the globe in the corner, his custom chair groaning as he settled. "Report progressing, Archie." I nodded, sliding him the first pages. Halfway, Kramer's already, called Hale's Singing Like a Canary, corroborating every point. Wolfe grunted satisfaction, eyes half closed in that pose of contentment. Eminently predictable. The human psyche, when cornered, yields. He sipped, foam moustache wiped away with a handkerchief. And the remuneration? The library board has expressed gratitude, fees commensurate. I smirked. Enough for a case of beer and then some. Maybe even a new hat for me. We fell into easy banter. The case dissected over Fritz's quail. Tender, sauced to perfection, with asparagus on the side and a Bordeaux that sang on the palate. Dinner in the dining room, yellow walls aglow under the chandelier, was a ritual of restoration. Wolfe expounded on orchids between bites, comparing the case's intricacies to a hybrid's breeding. Red herrings like sterile blooms, truths the fertile seed. I countered with street smarts, the legwork that grounded his aerial views. Post-meal, back to the office, Wolfe with beer, me with coffee, the radio murmuring jazz in the background. Billie Holiday's voice wove through the air, a melancholy underscore to victory. As night cloaked the city, lights twinkling like stars in the skyscrapers, I finished the report, filing copies for Kramer and our records. Loose ends tied, the magnetic device's remnants analyzed, stilts impounded, diary archived. Justice wasn't just served, it was plated with flourish, Wolfe style. Reflecting, I pondered the human folly, greed turning scholars to killers, secrets buried in vaults better left open. But that's the game. Shadows dispelled, order restored,